Well, the government announcement about Section 21 is a trending topic across social media and, of course, the private rented sector. Landlords in shock, tenants claiming victory. And to discuss that now, I'm joined by David Smith, Policy Director of the RLA and also partner at Anthony Gold Solicitors. And David, you've been on a media tour over the last few days, putting across the landlord's view. But, the government announcement, it actually left so many questions. What is your take on all of this?
Well, the government announcement's pretty disappointing. They've been saying to us a lot recently about how they want to be more cooperative with us and have more cooperation, and we're perfectly happy to have that. And then, as soon as they say that, they immediately go and blindside us by making an announcement that was in no way flagged to us at all. There was certainly always a possibility that there was going to be change, and change is being discussed. But to do it this way is pretty shocking, especially given that you've actually had an ongoing consultation on longer tenancies, which wasn't actually published until about 11 o'clock on Monday. When of course the announcement was made at midnight, so nearly 12 hours after they'd already effectively told you what the consultation was going to say, they then produce it. So, the normal way to these things is produce a consultation, let people look at it, and then move forward with the next consultation, rather than working this way. And of course, the housing court consultation hasn't even arrived yet, so we still don't know what that's going to say. Although again, it's hardly surprising now. I mean, pretty obvious what it's going to say. They're going to go for a housing court of some description, but it's pretty frustrating the way the government's dealt with this. And I think it's they and we've already said to them, if they really want to retain landlord confidence, they need to think about how not just how landlords are going to feel about this, but other measures. So, for example, I've seen someone quite rightly mentioning that the abandonment provisions in the Housing and Planning Act were never enacted. And one of the things I've already said to the government is, you need to, and I'd actually said this to them a few months ago, why are these things not been enacted? You stalled on it. You need to get on with it. These are important provisions. We've made a fuss already about the Homelessness Reduction Act. It's all very well to say landlords can evict, but if local authorities are actively stalling that, and of course we saw a story just last week that most local authorities can't afford to implement the Homelessness Reduction Act, so we're saying to the government, no, you've got to implement it. There's no point in saying to landlords, we'll give you alternative means to evict, if in fact the tenants are still stuck. And that doesn't work for anybody. So the reality is the government needs to make sure it flows through. And I think, coming back to Section 21, that is the same point there. There are other measures they're offering alongside it. They've got to link it up and make sure it flows through properly.
Indeed, and it was really just an announcement that there's going to be a consultation into Section 21, so it's not a done deal yet. Another consultation coming out. We urge landlords to engage with that consultation. Is there still a lot to play for, or is it really that Section 21 will disappear from the private rented sector in its current format, or completely? Well,
I think the government's certainly on a trajectory to get rid of Section 21, but I don't think that means that the decision is made. It's really difficult. I mean, the problem is that housing associations use STs and starter tenancies and Section 21. So how are you going to deal with that sector? The student market kind of relies on having fixed-term tenancies which are actually going to end. So there are sectors of the market that are going to have things fixed. There are a group of people, albeit a smaller group than there traditionally was, who are simply letting out their own home while they're somewhere else, and they want to be able to come back. Now,
the military, for example.
Military personnel, a very good example, yeah. So there are groups of people who sort of rely on Section 21 in an entirely reasonable and justified way, and at the moment, Section 8 in no way provides a replacement for that. Now, obviously, the government has said they will look at alternative grounds of possession under Section 8, but that doesn't just mean changing a few of them. That means cleaning up the entire mess of grounds that we've got. There have been odd ones grafted in here and there. People keep going about, there's a ground already for landlords to take back possession so they can live there, but ground one, which is the ground it is, can't be used inside a fixed term, has a very long notice period, and you can't use it at all if you haven't made sure you gave a tenant notice in advance of the tenancy telling them that you might use it. So we're full of odd little traps, which obviously, with my lawyer hat on, are very good for making me money, which is fine, thank you, but not actually a particularly practical mechanism for operation of a piece of legislation, and not very practical from the point of view of individuals on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's not. It's much more complex than the government has said in the announcement. Said, oh, we'll make a couple of small changes to Section 8 grounds. I don't think that's going to work. It's going to have to be a wholesale sweep through all of the grounds of possession, and a complete rethink over what should be mandatory, what should be discretionary, what the level of proof required is. If we're talking about, for example, 2 months rent arrears, should it be 2 months? Maybe it should only be 1 month, but with slightly more than 2 weeks' notice. Maybe it should be 3 months, but with less notice. There needs to be, maybe it should be 3 months, but you can use a paper-based accelerated procedure to get people out when there's a very severe rent arrears. So there's a whole range of different possibilities. And the reality is we need landlords to feed in what they would prefer in those possibilities. Would landlords prefer Section 8 Ground 8, 2 months rent arrears with 2 weeks' notice to remain as it is? Would they think it would be better if actually it was 1 month's rent arrears for a mandatory ground possession, but they had to give 4 weeks' notice, so the tenant would get a bit more time to sort things out at the start? But if they then failed to take that opportunity, that would be it. Or would they prefer that ground stayed as and a new ground to be added in of, say, 3 months rent arrears, which would allow some sort of paper-based accelerated possession procedure that you can use for Section 21 now, because on the basis that 3 months rent arrears is almost indefensible. It's very hard to actually, even if you haven't protected the deposit, it's very hard to get rid of that much rent arrears. So what would landlords prefer? I mean, obviously, many landlords prefer things stay as they are, but I think we have to be realistic and say that even if we keep Section 21, it's going to be changed in some way. And you know, that may be beneficial. The reality of Section 21 is now it's becoming harder and harder to use. The government's put little weird ring fences all round it. We've got the How to Rent Guide, we've got Right to Rent, we've got the whole current fiasco that's still going on with gas safety certificates. So in practice, maybe having a really bad Section 21 that no one can use is actually a worse option than having a completely revamped system that works for people. So we need to think about what it is that we actually want. I think we need to be very clear about that. And I think there is some appetite within government to listen to what landlords practically and pragmatically want in order to make a sector work in terms of changes. So we need to be very clear about what we're after and see what we can get.
Indeed, I think you've already stated that it's very complex. The relationship between a landlord and tenant is not black and white. There are many scenarios where a landlord might have lots of different things accumulate that leads them to want to end the relationship with the tenant. I'm talking things like constant late payment of rent, antisocial behaviour, find out that the tenant has an unauthorised pet, the tenant subletting. This is where Section 21 came in, because landlords do not get rid of tenants, good tenants, for no fault. There's always something behind the reason, and it seems to me that this, the government's approach now is trying to make it black and white, and it's just simply not.
Yeah, I think this comes back to this issue of what should be a discretionary ground possession and what should be a mandatory ground possession. The reality is that many landlords, when faced with a lot of small things, which might all fit under maybe ground 12 or for general breaches of the tenancy agreement, or ground 14 for antisocial behaviour, or ground 11 for late payment, but all of which are discretionary, and they feel, well, I'm never going to be able to prove that in court to a satisfactory level. Perhaps we need to rethink how that discretionary structure works, and perhaps it should be more of a points-based system. If you can show 4 or 5 things, then that discretionary ground becomes a mandatory ground, and those are the kind of things that we need to consider. So the issue of discretionary and mandatory is always is a real problem in this area, and how far should a landlord have to go to make their case? What level of behaviour is just too much? And Section 21 has been an easy answer from a landlord's perspective to all of that. If that is no longer going to be there, then we need an alternative, viable answer that people can pragmatically apply for themselves on the ground. And I think that's the point that needs to be got across to government. And like I say, I think they understand that there are points to be made, and we just need to make them and keep making them calmly but firmly.
I mean, we've had tenants claiming, tenant rights group claiming victory on social media. The problem with going the Section 8 route is the tenant could well end up with a CCJ. Many landlords with tenants in rent arrears just went for Section 21 and took the rent arrears on the chin. And it seems to me now that actually this could be worse off for tenants if they start getting CCJs via the Section 8 route.
Yeah, and this is one of the problems, I think. there are tenants' rights groups and tenants' rights groups. I'm not sure that all tenants' rights groups necessarily represent the interests of all tenants, shall we say. They represent the interests of some tenants, and there was certainly a perception among some of those people that Section 21 was being overused. I think there have been particular problems within the London market specifically, where the strongest tenant rights groups ultimately link up, and with some justification there. Most renters are in London. There is a nexus there. They potentially have a point, but I think there are other types of tenants who might. Certainly, there have been cases where I've seen plenty of cases where tenants almost want a Section 21, so that they can then go to the local authority and avail themselves of homeless provision, where the local authority would normally not give them assistance in Ground 8. So for a Section 8, Ground 8, or some other antisocial behaviour issue or something like that, they would just say, well, no, we're not giving you any help. But that, again, I think is where the Homelessness Reduction Act has to be properly implemented, because the Homelessness Reduction Act is meant to try and move us away from this points-based system and this blame-based system, and is meant to focus much more on addressing the situation of people who are threatened with homelessness at the earliest possible opportunity. So potentially actually putting us in a situation where the landlord doesn't even have to go down the route of possession, and because the problems between them and the tenant are resolved with the tenant still in the property, which would be ideal for everybody at the end of the day. Or where eviction is required, then the tenant is reaccommodated properly, with less of a, well, you did this wrong or you did that wrong. And the government needs to follow that through and change the guidance and really start enforcing it and pushing local authorities to actually comply with the law. Local authorities are routinely breaking the law, and fairly bluntly and openly, and to be honest with you, that's not really acceptable.
Indeed. Well, we've heard on social media of landlords. A friend of mine with 80 properties told me today that if Section 21 goes, he will sell up his 80 properties. I'm sure you'll agree that landlords shouldn't take a knee-jerk reaction to this news. There's a lot to play for, as we've been saying, and nothing may happen for some considerable, significant period of time.
Well, I think there will be a consultation pretty soon, but so what? You've got to get legislation. That's got to move through Parliament. That could take a while. This will be quite a complex piece of legislation. So I think rather like with the Tenant Fees Act, had a lot of agents saying, "Oh, we have to immediately stop charging fees, and what are we going to do?" And I was like, "Well, actually, you've got over a year to worry about this." And they're now starting to finally get there, and many of them are still not complying with it in practice, of course. I think landlords should avoid just going mad at this stage. We're looking at the latter part of 2020 almost certainly. The chances are it will actually won't back apply. There'll be no retrospective. It'll be new tenancies moving forward. I'd be very surprised if the government tried to apply it on a retrospective basis. That would be a very, very extreme and unusual position to adopt. And of course, it might never happen at all. You don't need me to point out that. That at the current time, the likelihood of the government staying the same as it is today is pretty damn low. It might be the same party but different people. It might be a totally different party. It might be some complex amalgamation of several parties. It might be a military junta. Who knows? The situation is so uncertain right now. You just don't know who's going to be. It might be Extinction Rebellion and climate change activists. You just don't know who's going to be in charge and what their position's going to be. So I wouldn't rush into selling up. I think we need to wait and see what the consultation says, what the response to that consultation is, and what the legislation starts to look like as it starts to come out and how it's shaped. It may well be that in 2020, landlords may justifiably and rightly decide to sell up, and that may be the right decision. There's an argument, of course, for saying go first while house prices are better, but I would hardly say that house prices right now are very strong. So you might well be better to wait a bit longer anyway, in the hope that we'll resolve our situation with the European Union as well. So it's really too early, I think, to go and make rush decisions. And while landlords are understandably very frustrated, and I'm pretty frustrated, as was probably clear for some of my media appearances on Monday, we do need to just hang on. Yes, tenants groups are happy. Of course they're happy. Why shouldn't they be happy? But they probably just need to hold on as well. And there's many a slip between cup and lip, as they say, and I'll probably just use far too many metaphors during this session. So I think let's see what happens.
Indeed, and I think landlords watching this, we want you to engage with the consultation. As David's saying, keep your powder dry. I think the only thing is, David, that some landlords that are maybe 5 years away from the end of their landlord career, they're just suffering this hammering against landlords, these attacks. They may just feel, I've had enough, I want to exit. They may bring forward their plans to leave. And it seems to me, and I don't know whether you agree, the pendulum has been in favour of landlords for the last 15 years or so. It's swinging back the other way, and very often when a pendulum swings, it goes to the extreme first before it finds the middle ground. So I suspect there is more pain for landlords to come, unfortunately.
That's not an unfair assessment. The reality is that if you look at housing law across the whole sweep of the 19th and 20th century, and 21st century as we now are, it has tended to swing back and forth. So yes, it's quite possible it will swing too far, but even during the Rent Act 1977 days, there were still people making money and making profits. So I don't think it's true to say that it's impossible to be a landlord. I suspect that some business models will no longer be viable. Absolutely. If landlords are close to their planned retirement, yes, I can understand that bringing that forward might well be the right move for them. But I don't think that it's true to say that being a landlord's a bad idea at the moment. It is one of a number of investment options for sure, and of course, what I would always say to people is have a mixed investment portfolio. But it's too early to say that it's time to run, and indeed the market probably isn't quite right for that anyway at the moment. So I think it's a little early to jump. There are plenty of people coming into the sector. So there are plenty of people, even with all of this stuff going on, who still think that the sector is a worthwhile place to be. And the reality is, it's going to be good, and it's got to be good, because we still don't have enough houses for everybody. And that's not going to change for at least another 10 years. So in fact, we've still got a housing situation where house supply is necessary. So there must still be economic value in being involved in that.
Indeed. Well, David, thank you very much for all your efforts on behalf of landlords, talking to the media this week, and also obviously you've had some actually quite positive discussions with government as well. And thank you for coming to see us here at propertytribes.com and for sharing your kind of insider views on what's going on. And I think, this story is going to run and run and run. But one positive thing I do think, David, is we have had record traffic and record engagement at Property Tribes this week. And it's actually, I think it's very healthy that some landlords that probably wouldn't be involved in landlord discussions are actually joining in now. And ultimately, that could be positive for the landlord voice, positive for the Residential Landlords Association and the other landlords associations if more numbers come and start engaging with these important topics.
Well, that's true. I think landlords are a little bit too apathetic. The RLA is one of the biggest landlord associations, but we're barely even managing 1% of the sector. The average for a professional association is around 20% of the sector size, so we've got a long way to go. Even if you were to put all the landlord associations together, we're just about scraping 1 to 1.5% of the sector. So it's a long way, and I think a lot more landlords need to think about this and engage, and hopefully this might shake some of them into doing so. Yeah. It's not a lot of money. I will have a quick plug, if I may,
yes.
And point out that the government consultation is coming at some indeterminate point. Within the next, before Easter, there will be an RLA survey going out, which is open to any landlord who wants to fill it in, and it will be available on the media. You will see it, encouraging landlords to give their views on where they want Section 21 to go, and we will be using that to inform our responses to government. So please take a short time out of your Easter holiday, give us 15 minutes to fill in a survey. Think about it's 15 minutes escaping your family when they're driving you mad. Fill in our survey for 15 minutes and give us your views on where you think things need to go if Section 21 is in fact going to be removed, and what you need out of the sector to stay in the sector.
Well, we will certainly be sharing that survey here at Property Tribes, and we do encourage everybody watching this to engage with that survey and also the government consultation when it does land. We can't stress that strongly enough. And we'll be keeping in contact with David and bringing you further updates as to whether Section 21 is going to remain in the private rented sector. But right now, the private rented sector needs you. Thanks, David.
Thank you.